Welcome in, Falcons fans. Your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for more Falcons content. And today, as you see on the screen with me, I have a special guest, Steve Wyche, NFL Network's chief national reporter. I appreciate you, sir, coming on, man. How are you doing today?
Bryce, I'm doing really well, man. No complaints. You're doing a great job as usual. Thanks for asking me to come on. I'm really looking forward to today. Sure, yes, we got a few things to talk about.
Yeah, plenty of things. Listen, I feel like really respects, stuff that you report about the team and what you say and your opinion. So it's always good to have you on and things like that nature. I called you maybe even the face of national media for the Falcons, but yeah, that was just something
hyperbole, right?
Yeah, exactly, man. So like I said, I appreciate you coming on, man. Like you said, we have a lot to talk about, man. And the draft just passed. And I would say overall, I think the main consensus I've gained is Falcons fans are a bit perplexed by the draft, I would say. Let's just go into it with the first pick, Michael Penix Jr. at the 8th pick. Leading up to the draft, where everybody thought defense, maybe best player available, maybe that could be a receiver, maybe. And then you started hearing rumors leading up, oh, maybe their quarterback's in play. But yeah, I feel like it's one of those things where people are like, oh, it's just a smokescreen. Falcons ended up making the pick, shocked a lot of people. Tell me what your initial reaction to that pick was. And now after almost a week after that, or basically now, a week after that, do you feel any differently than you did then?
Well, first off, I was absolutely stunned, completely stunned, like everybody else was, not just Falcons fans. They're still taking shots from people in the NFL world and stuff like, what are you doing here? This is the 4th time you've had a top 8 pick. And the first 3 times you drafted non-premium positions, which were quarterback or people who affect the quarterback, left tackle, corner, edge rusher. So now you got your quarterback. You just paid Kirk Cousins in free agency, $100 million guaranteed, and you go and draft a quarterback. And so a week later, do I still – I don't get it. I get it. I spoke to Raheem Morris. I spoke to some people in the building. I understand their justification. But it's almost as if they're playing a little long-term conservative football instead of having a roster that's really pretty good in a division that is more than winnable right now. And if you get that head of steam of momentum going, you can make a playoff run. Now, Raheem told me that's what Kirk Cousins is here to do. He is here to go ahead and get us into the playoffs. And I get that part. I honestly get that part. But to compare this to like the Packers and Jordan Love, it doesn't make sense, right? Aaron Rodgers had been with the organization for more than 10 years in Green Bay. The relationship was souring. You knew it was coming to an end. They just went out and got Kirk Cousins. They just invested in that position. So I get it. Hopefully 3 years from now, when Michael Penix gets his chance to start, barring injury to Kirk Cousins, he turns out to be a great player, because I don't think anybody is chastising Michael Penix, the player. It's just the pick. And I'm going to be a little long here, but, Raheem Morris told me that they wanted to make that pick, and then they tried to get back up, right? After they picked Penix, they were trying to trade back up into the first round to get Leatu Latu, and they just couldn't find anybody to where they could get them ahead of the Colts. But it's just, that's more, to me, that was more of the pressing pick. You get Latu, you finally get somebody who can win off the edge. You got Kirk Cousins. The next 3 years, when you're saying Kirk Cousins is going to be your guy to get you to the playoffs and Michael Penix doesn't play, well, now you got a stud edge rusher who can get you maybe to the Super Bowl. Don't have that guy right now. You still don't have that guy. They have not had an edge rusher who can win one-on-one since John Abraham back in 2007, 2008. So, again, hopefully this all works out. Hopefully Raheem and his staff can coach up and continue to develop some of these young players. And Cousins is great, and Penix is the ideal backup. But it is a strategy that has everybody waiting to see how this is going to work out. Because, again, nobody disagrees with Michael Penix. You understand the thinking of it. But the thinking of it after you just paid Kirk Cousins $100 million in guarantees, you're on the hook for it. That's the head scratching part.
Yeah, and I think that, again, that's why it was a shocker. I think one of the things that I've gotten, because we've heard multiple explanations and all these things, and like you said, you've talked to Raheem and them. It seems like the process is where it's kind of confusing. You know, like you said, the roster is pretty good. You know, you could make more improvements to the roster this year, and potentially, you know, in a winnable division, you get into the playoffs, like Raheem has said, anything can happen. And to make a move like that with a top 10 pick that basically won't benefit you this year, you know, is a little questionable. And I completely get that. It's almost like the Falcons are, and the entire draft class as a whole, a lot of people feel like it's like they're planning for the future, even though they can compete right now. And maybe you could say when he was with the Rams, you know, the Rams went all in. When they had a couple injuries, they had no assets initially, you know, just because they went all in on trying to win a Super Bowl, which paid off. And maybe he was just like, okay, I want us to be able to be in a win now situation, but not, I guess, be in that same spot. Because, like, I get it to a certain degree. Oh, if we're going to be a good team, well, we're going to be in the 20s. How likely is it we're going to get our next franchise quarterback in the 20s or have to give up our entire draft class to get one? Which I get. But at the same time, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. And so it was a bit of a risk on that part. And just speaking to the rest of the draft class, like you said, there was a lot of young players they drafted. It seemed they went heavy defensive line after that pick.
Right.
You know? So so they clearly wanted to address it. When you look at the rest of the draft class, I mean, there's some guys I think people are excited about. I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but I know the player, Washington, the defensive.
Yeah, Braylon Trice, the edge rusher who played for Jimmy Lake. He's a good player.
Yes, exactly. And I think people are excited for him. I think, you know, people are excited for the Oregon interior guy. I don't know why I forgot both their names just now. They're excited for him.
Brandon Dorlus.
Yes. And so what, I guess, based off that, how did you feel about the rest of the draft after that pick?
Well, I mean, it's telling me that, you know, Grady Jarrett is still recovering. You know, we don't know when he's going to be at 100%. So they wanted to protect themselves there. It probably tells me that also Calais Campbell is not coming back, but you never know. I mean, but they've already got a pretty good defensive line. I mean, David Onyemata, I mean, they got some players in there. So, you know, when I look at this, again, Raheem is big on having a ton of guys in the defensive front. I live in LA. I'm around the Rams a lot, and they like to rotate guys through. So maybe they do bring back Calais. They continue to rotate guys through to help defensively. But again, it seems like the only offensive move they made to help them get over the hump was to get Cousins in terms of the immediate future, and that was done in free agency. So again, I like their roster. I love their coaching staff. I mean, it's not just Raheem. They've got a very, very, very strong coaching staff. So we'll just see what they can do to get things going. Maybe Kirk Cousins sees this as an extra motivating factor. I don't know if he ever needs one. This guy was a 4th-round draft pick who's made it a long way in this league and done some good things. I don't think he needs extra motivation. But to me, I mean, on paper, they should win the NFC South. You know, but that's on paper. You know, the Buccaneers are going to be good, again, because defensively they're very good. I think losing Dave Canales as the offensive coordinator is going to hurt him a little bit. The Saints, you know, you just don't know. I mean, they're an aging team that's really kind of pushed everything to this year, and then they're going to blow it up next year. So, and the Panthers are still like a year away from being a year away. So it'll be interesting. I mean, I think the Falcons can do some things this year, which is fine. To have a number 8 overall pick in reserve is something most teams wouldn't have done, but maybe they end up again in the long play looking like they're smarter than all of us.
Yeah, and sometimes I think that's what people go for when you make these decisions, you know, and that's going to be the interesting part. And like you said, Penix, there's nothing wrong with Penix. I think a lot of people think Penix can be a really good player. Well, obviously we'll have to see when we get to that point, but I think that obviously would be, I guess, the one positive takeaway as well from that as well. But when you look at the rest of the roster too, like you said, you really like the roster. I think one part of the roster that a lot of people are still having some questions is that cornerback 2, opposite AJ Terrell. You got Clark Phillips from last year, Mike Hughes, Maybe D. Alford potentially in competition for that spot. Some people thought that they were going to maybe address it during the draft. They didn't. In the press conference, they said everything didn't align correctly to take a guy. They didn't want to reach, whatever. So there are some guys out there in free agency that they could look at. Is there any particular corner that is currently available that you could see the Falcons going after? And
well, this is me knowing Raheem very well. Name me, other than Jalen Ramsey and Marcus Peters, who the Rams traded for, name me another Rams corner. Exactly. Right? Their belief is you get pressure with the front seven, and Raheem's very creative in how he gets his pressures built. And you won't necessarily have to have a ton of Pro Bowlers on the back end. It's a theory that, a lot of teams use. I mean, the Niners are the same way. Until they paid Charvarius Ward, Richard Sherman was probably the most notable corner that they've had. So I know how Raheem can scheme things up. I mean, again, watching the Rams those years when they went out and traded for Peters and Jalen were fine, but the development of other young DBs has been amazing. There have been a lot of guys who've been with that team who've gone on to make money elsewhere at safety and at corner. I know Raheem loves A.J. Terrell. He was there on the Falcons staff when they drafted Terrell. Loves Jesse Bates at safety. So, again, we'll see. I mean, this is an area where, again, I don't think you necessarily need a star at that CB2, especially in this division. Now, when you're going up against the Detroit Lions or the Niners or a team like that, when it gets real, you might need one. But the scheme that they play, it's a heavy zone type scheme. You may just feel that that's not where your priority lies.
That makes sense. I mean, and like I said, every coaching staff has a philosophy. They have a scheme. They have something that they have a vision for whatever their both sides of the ball are going to be. And he clearly believes that, he said it. I believe in what we got. I like what we have. It's the same thing with the safety position opposite Jesse Bates. I know Richie Grant didn't have to come off the greatest year, but he said he still says I was wrong about Richie Grant, and he feels like he's better than maybe what some people think now of him. And so that's going to be interesting to see how all that comes together under Jimmy Lake and Raheem Morris's vision for that defense. Now, offensively, obviously, we know about the talent they have. Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson. They signed Kirk Cousins to help get them over the top. I think Raheem's mentioned it before. If they had better quarterback play last year, he wouldn't be here. With the addition of Kirk Cousins, when the move was made, was it something that you pretty much knew, like, they're going to be aggressive from the get-go, getting a guy quickly? Or was it something that you kind of maybe looked at and said, maybe they'll wait a little bit, see how things play out, maybe focus on some other positions first? And then now that Kirk Cousins is in Atlanta, how do you like the fit overall?
Well, you knew if they were going after Cousins, they had to be aggressive. Otherwise, Minnesota or somebody would sign him. I mean, it was just that simple. They had to be aggressive. He was the top free agent on the market. So you understood that was their idea going in. They had to be aggressive. They knew the quarterback was the issue. Arthur Blank said, we're going to have a quarterback. Just like I'm sure, the Falcons work very collaboratively, including Arthur Blank, when it comes to decisions like this. I'm sure he was very much involved when he said, we're getting a quarterback for the future too, because we don't want to be left naked like we were when Matt Ryan was gone. Right. So, in terms of Kirk Cousins, the one thing or the couple things, this is still going to be a run. It won't be as run heavy. But, Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier. People keep leaving out Tyler Algier when they talk about the Falcons offense. Don't make that mistake. Guy's a good player, right? He's a perfect complement to Bijan's flash, right? But you are going to see what they really need to find in this offense is that really intriguing slot receiver, right? You've got to have the motion guy. The motion guy is not necessarily going to be Drake London, right? Who's going to be the motion man? Who's going to be the tough? And it's not a typical tiny slot guy that they use in this offense. It's a tough. Think of Cooper Kupp. Think of Puka Nacua. Think of Deebo Samuel. This is the same scheme. Now, you could bend it a little bit like the Bengals who run the scheme did with Tyler Boyd, right? A motion guy who's a little quick if that's what fits but he's going to have to be physical to come back and crack on the outside linebacker or the edge rusher to spring a run. So, but the one thing that Cousins is going to bring is he doesn't turn the ball over, right? He's pretty good in the red zone. He's not great, but he's pretty good in the red zone. That was the issue with the Falcons. They moved the ball. Desmond Ridder moved the ball last year. He's getting in the red zone and he turned the ball over. And so, Cousins doesn't make mistakes. He makes plays when he has to. That'll be huge. Now, and speaking to Raheem, he said that they are going to find a way to make Kyle Pitts a focal point, which I know has been the biggest head scratcher for people since he's been there. So we'll see. And the tight end has really not been that much of a factor in the scheme. I mean, Tyler Higbee comes up with plays for the Rams. George Kittle makes plays for the 49ers, but, those are more splash plays. He's more of an inline blocker, than he is somebody making 8 catches for 90 yards and a touchdown every game. So I think you'll see some things taken from the Vikings scheme where TJ Hawkinson as a tight end was a big target for Kirk Cousins. And I think that's where they'll sample some stuff for Pitts. So I think there's going to be kind of a meshing of what this offense did under Zach Robinson with the Rams and maybe with some of Kevin O'Connell does with the Vikings that Cousins is going to bring with him.
Yeah, and I wanted to touch on a point that you mentioned with the offense is obviously with Zach Robinson being the new offensive coordinator, I think obviously what type of scheme they're going to run, but obviously in terms of a play caller, he may be a little bit different because he just hasn't done it yet, right? And you mentioned the slot receiver. Now, they did acquire Darnell Mooney and Rondale Moore over the offseason. And people have been debating, is Darnell really going to be wide receiver 2? Is Rondale going to be wide receiver 3? And we don't know. Right now it seems like that's going to be the case. They could still make an addition. They could still make something happen. When it comes to those additions that they made, did you like those additions? Because it seems like one thing they've lacked is speed. They've usually had possession guys, jump ball guys. Those two guys are both sub 4.2, 4.3 guys. So clearly, I immediately thought they want to be more big play offense. They want to be able to stretch the field more and potentially use those guys, especially a guy like Rondale Moore in space.
Yep.
What do you think about those two additions and maybe what that means?
I'm so glad you brought that up because Rondale Moore, he's been hurt. That's his issue. He's a smaller guy and he has not been able to stay healthy. But man, when he gets the ball in his hands, he is a dangerous weapon. Right, he is a dangerous weapon. And with the new kickoff rules, I could see him being a returner and being the explosive guy who could hit it. He'll play some in the slot. They'll probably use him some as kind of a hybrid running back of sorts, a motion guy who they can flip it to. Mooney, I think, would be more, of that wide receiver too, that type of player. But again, look at the offense. Look at the scheme where it comes from. These parts are semi-interchangeable in terms of the pre-snap looks that they give you. They're not necessarily the same role, but again, I'm thinking back with Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Very similar builds, very similar athletic skill sets. Puka's a little faster, but they use them differently. All the pre-snap stuff, it looks the same. Okay, he's going to motion. Before he gets to the tight end, he's going to give us a look like he's going to crack the tight end. Oh, wait, he's actually going up the field. So I think they're going to be able to disguise and mask some things with this offense a little bit. Again, I think they're going to bring some stuff from Minnesota, with, Addison, what the rookie did last year. There's a lot of principles from this scheme. And when you talk about people from the Shanahan-McVay tree, right? Kyle Shanahan runs the hell out of the football. Mike McDaniel runs the hell out of the football down in Miami, but all of a sudden that sets up play action, explosive plays. Whereas Zach Taylor up in Cincinnati, he's more of a let's throw it. Kevin O'Connell up in Minnesota, let's throw it. But a lot of the looks look the same. So it's hard to figure out tendencies and personnel packages just based on the creativity that the scheme allows you to provide. But the main thing that's important is it is still a run-first scheme. Not in the Arthur Smith way where you're just going to run it 45 times a game. But in terms of the look, the blocking schemes, and things like that to set up the pass game, they all are based off the run.
Yeah, and I think, some people asked when Zach was brought in, like, how would that change the running game? How would that change how they've been? Because they've had success running the football. You mentioned Tyler Algier, what he's done. And I think Bijan, people are most excited for. I think most people would say maybe Bijan was not used to the best of his abilities last year. You would assume in this situation with Zach coming in the scheme that will change, and that all the things we thought we were going to see with Bijan last year, we may see this year. I could maybe say, could they use him more like Kyle Shanahan uses Christian McCaffrey potentially? Maybe. What are your expectations for Bijan this year in year 2 with this new scheme that you know they're going to run? And just are we maybe going to see the Bijan maybe we thought we were going to see, or like overall, what is your impression of him in his outlook for the season?
Well, he's going to get the opportunities to show what he can do in the run and pass game. I mean, the one thing out of this backfield is you are going to get thrown the football. Think of Raheem Mostert, doing the off-tackle stuff, but also catching the passes down to Miami. You think of Christian McCaffrey. Think of Kyron Williams with the Rams. I mean, they're like Kyron Williams is Tyler Algier maybe could get that role because Kyron Williams is a really good red zone dude, but he's got some stuff to him too. So I think, again, it'd be a combination of all of these things that they're trying to do. They were trying to do it last year with the Vikings in this offense. You think about some of the stuff that Joe Mixon used to do in Cincinnati. I mean, that's what I would encourage, anybody who's really looking at what this offense is going to look like. Maybe a mix of all of these guys who have directly touched Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan in some type of way, and say, okay, look, Bijan, maybe he can be Raheem Mostert in this run game. He gets through and bam, he's gone for 60. Or maybe he can do some stuff like McCaffrey, which he can. Okay, maybe Algier can be more like Kyron Williams in this game. Or Joe Mixon in this game. So there's just so many things that they're going to be able to do. It all starts up front, and we know this offensive line can run block. But I also think Kirk Cousins is going to have a lot to say in the shaping of this. How much do I want to get under center? How much do I want to play from the gun? What types of situations? Because the run game's not going to work if you're sitting in the gun all the time. It takes away some personnel packaging options. So I'm really interested, but I think this offense is going to open up a lot. We knew what the Falcons' identity was from day one of Arthur Smith. We're going to run it till you stop us. This, I think, is going to be, you think we're going to run it, but we're actually going over the top. I think that's what the personnel groupings that they've done, like you said, especially getting those 2 wide receivers, are going to do to allow them to open up this offense a little and to let Bijan shine, because he's not going to be facing us on 8-man boxes.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned just that unpredictability. We don't know what we're going to do. We're going to give you a look, but you don't know if we're actually going to go with what the look says or something different. And one criticism I think some people may have with Arthur Smith's offense was, it was predictable at times. At times, they're going to football, and then sometimes when they pass, it's like, okay, we know what's coming, right? And so obviously we're expecting that to change. When we talk about, like I said, we already talked about Mooney and Moore. Drake London is a guy who I see people talk about. Drake London's not considered as one of the highly top receivers in the game, right? Even though he's been pretty consistent and solid through his first 2 years in the league, going into year 3, looking to continue to grow to his game. Can you talk about maybe what this offense could do for him in his game? Because it feels like, I feel like everybody feels like he's a wide receiver 1, but maybe with the limited quarterback play that the Falcons have had, that has impacted him and what he could look like. And so can you just talk about how big this year could be for Drake London, especially now that he's getting close to a contract year, the 5th-year option year, those years coming up?
Yeah, it's a turn-the-page year for him because he's going to be looked at as a wide receiver 1. He's going to have a quarterback who can get him the ball. He's going to have an offense that isn't, again, run, throw on 3rd down. So this is a great opportunity for him. It's just now he's got to win, right? When he goes up in double coverage. Wide receiver 1s face double coverage. Make the play. He's got the ability to do it. So now we're going to see. And then there'll be some situations where he's going to be ISO'd up. Go make the play. And I think he's going to be used more than just as a possession receiver. He's going to be used downfield on some opportunities. So, but he's going to have to block his butt off. There's not one receiver in this scheme that does not have to block his tail off. So that's part of it as well. And we know he's willing to do that. So I think when you do all this preseason stuff, player to watch for in 2024, Drake London's name needs to be on that list, because I think he's somebody who all of a sudden can start getting into that conversation of, oh, he's nice. Kind of like Amon-Ra St. Brown had all those really good years his first 2 or 3 years. And then people are like, oh, this dude's the truth. Right? That could be Drake London in the scheme.
Yeah, and I'm really excited for him this year because of that. I mean, Drake London, I feel like, has always showed us the flashes. It's just, like I said, the consistency from the quarterback to help, show that what he can do, his skill set, his ability. And so now when we take a look at the whole thing, Raheem Morris was brought in. Terry Fontenot, remained from when Arthur Smith was here. One thing they've always talked about is collaboration, being on the same page, being together. And even with the Michael Penix pick, I think that was an example of that.
1,000%.
We are going to be, we have the same mindset. This is what we need to do. We need to go accomplish it. Let's go do it. The way they approached and were aggressive for Cousins, Michael Penix, etc. Can you just talk about how important that is? Because I feel like there have been times where people wonder, are the coach and the GM on the same page? Are they thinking the same? Did someone win out? Was it a power struggle? And it feels like just the energy I've gotten from those two is that they're pretty much like, we see the same way, we want the same things, so this is the plan we're going to enact to get it. Can you just talk about how important that is, especially in this time where you're coming into a situation, even with a new head coach, there are expectations to win now.
Yeah, I mean, it's significant. And I think Terry had that with Arthur Smith. I think they collaborated to say, okay, we're going to roll with Desmond Ridder. We're not going to go out and get a quarterback we had an opportunity to. We're not going to draft Justin Fields or Zach Wilson, one of these guys. We had an opportunity to possibly do that. So I think they worked collaboratively that way. And with Raheem, it's abundantly clear. And again, Arthur Blank is in on these decisions. Rich McKay is in somewhat on some of these decisions. It is a collaborative effort. When they do coaching searches, it is a widespread net of people that they use to interview coaching candidates. So everything the Falcons do, and that's Arthur Blank's structure. He doesn't necessarily want to have unchecked balances like the Patriots did with Bill Belichick. It worked that way with Bill Belichick having such power. I mean, that's why he's the greatest coach ever. Mm-hmm. May not be the best guy who can draft, as it showed, once he lost some of that great talent, namely Tom Brady. But, I think it's important with both Terry and Raheem that they work well together, because Terry Fontenot's not going to get a chance to hire another head coach. If this doesn't work, he'll be gone as well. Mm-hmm. Raheem Morris is trying to show that he's going to be a better head coach than he was the first time around in Tampa Bay. So they have to have a collaborative relationship. They've got to include, and just knowing both these guys the way I do, it's not just those two. They're going to be including their assistant coaches. They're going to be including their personnel staff on a lot of the moves that they make, even if it comes down to how are we going to structure this new kickoff rule? Are we going to have big guys who can play this, or are we going to keep an extra tight end and an extra linebacker because they're used to playing in those types of spatial parameters, on regular? That's what the kickoff is going to be. 5 yards away from each other between the kickoff team and the return team. Well, that sounds like an outside linebacker guarding a tight end. So instead of keeping 2 tight ends, we're going to keep 3 to have one playing the kickoff team. Instead of keeping 3 outside linebackers, we're going to keep 4. So I think, when the special teams coordinator is going to be heavily involved in these types of things. And again, that's just a culture that Arthur Blank and the Falcons have used for years since he's owned the team. And that's, and Raheem Morris, I'm sure, understood that through the interview process, that this was how it's going to work. No one's going to have the upper hand. And look, good GMs listen to their head coach. A good GM is not going to say, I am getting this quarterback. And the head coach is like, I don't want this. We saw this years ago when the owner of the Tennessee Titans took Vince Young, and Jeff Fisher didn't want him. So it was always a wrestling match as to when Fisher was going to play him, when he could get him out of there. And you saw how explosively that ended. Mm-hmm. And nobody wants that.
Yeah, it's. I mean, that example just shows how important it is for people to be on the same page. Like I said, you've heard stories of guys particularly not be, and I feel like Steve, it's reflected in the coaching staff. You know, last year the Falcons didn't have a quarterback coach; it was de facto offensive coordinator, right? This year they have a QB coach, pass game coordinator, 3 more quarterback assistant coaches. You know, to me that just describes that collaboration, the fact that you just have that much of a support system, which could be great for a guy like Michael Penix, just to know I have multiple people who I can learn from, gain knowledge from. And, you know, instead of maybe just having the traditional one person with the offense coordinator, or if you have an offensive-minded head coach as well. And, you know, like you said, it was a very impressive coaching staff that they put together, especially with the amount of young players they have and they're going to probably rely on this year. Can you just talk about the importance of just having that support system for every position? You know, regardless if you're a starter, you know, special teams, like you mentioned, for the kickoff team, and, you know, defense. Because, like I said, if they're going to rely on young players to help them win this year, the coaching staff plays a big part in that.
Well, you know, especially 2 parts. First off, nobody's around the players more than the position coaches, right? You know, the outside backers coach, he's with that group all the time. And so that's who they rely on. That's who they trust. They're not going to Raheem Morris to ask questions. They're going to the position coach. So that's why your position coaches are so highly important when it comes to it. So that's why you've got to find the right guys. You have to find the right guys who, as a head coach, are going to teach your message, not just in the X's and O's, but teach you the way you want to be coached, right? It's okay if a guy's a yeller and a screamer, but at the same time, he's got to love a lot of these guys up. These are different dudes now, right? We all came up, you know, back when I was coming up, it was you took what the coach gave you and you said it with a smile on your face, no matter how bad he cut you, your mama, and your daddy down while he was saying it. You can't do that to these players nowadays, right? They make too much money. They will get you fired. So you have to have a staff that wants to work how you want them to work. And you have to recognize talent. I believe DJ Williams, Doug Williams' son, is one of the quarterback coaches. He's somebody who's a rising star. He came up through the Saints, you know, coaching staff, and he's someone people know is in a couple of years is going to be, you know, a guy if he keeps on that track. So to be able to identify a younger guy who can relate to some of the younger players, like maybe Michael Penix, he might be assigned to Penix. Okay, hey, look, during practice, Kirk, once we get into the season, Kirk has taken 98% of the reps. I need you to stay after every day 35 minutes with Penix, who's been running the other team's plays all practice, to make sure he knows our plays and our game plan. Right? That's hugely important. You talk about CJ Stroud, the quarterback coach that they had down there. They talk, I forget his name, not Bobby Slowick, the OC, but they say this guy's magic. And what he did with Stroud in the free time to make sure he was prepared and things like that, I mean, it made all the difference in the world. And you know, the offensive coordinators have to coordinate the offensive line, receivers, things like that. You know, they got to really go through the analytics. What are we doing between our backside, 20 to 40, things like that. Position coaches are coaching the position. And again, the staff, Raheem's got some really good people on the. I love this staff. Now, how well will they work together? Will they get guys to play to their peak? That remains to be seen. But again, there's no reason why the Falcons should not be a good football team. There's absolutely none. Especially now if Kirk Cousins doesn't bounce back from the injury, or if he were to get hurt. You got the number 8 overall pick right there to step in for him. So they've left themselves no excuses, which is how it should be with every team. It's not. You can't have that dynamic every year. But I think they should be held accountable every step of the way in 2024.
Yeah, and especially with the NFC right now, it's, I mean, you know, 49ers are the defending, you know, reigning NFC champions. It's still, I feel like a lot of people feel like it's kind of wide open. There's a lot of people that could, you know, don't know what the Eagles are going to be. Don't know what, you know, NFC North seems like, you know, Vikings look like they're taking a step back. Green Bay is probably a team that we see as ascending. This conference is kind of wide open for the Falcons a little bit, you know, to really make a run.
Well, I mean, look, it's wide open every year. But when you see what Detroit has built, right, they're going to be a tough out. The Niners, the Rams are going to be really good this year. So that's where if the Falcons can be, if they play their potential, they might be able to get in there. They got to score. And that's the big thing, right? You get Kirk Cousins, you got to put points on the board. You put points on the board, then this defense isn't having to stay on the field and slug it out like they've had to do the past 3 years. You know, we're going to sit there and bang on the defense when you got to go toe-to-toe with any team in the NFL week after week after week. That's tough. But if you have an offense that can get you a lead and you can do some things differently on defense, again, you might not need that great cornerback too. You know, you might not need a dynamic second edge rusher. You need one. You got to have one to win in this league. But if you can put points on the board in the NFC, it is going to help you out tremendously when you have to go toe-to-toe in a game like we saw in the NFC Championship with the Niners and the Lions. Right? Lions had that game and just couldn't hang on. They weren't quite ready yet, but they're going to be there. So the Falcons can make headway. That's why they went out and they paid their quarterback $100 million. They didn't do that just to win a division that they could have won anyway.
Yeah, and I think, too, it's funny because people are going to talk about Kirk and talk about the playoff record. You know, he doesn't have the best playoff record in the world. And we could look at different things. We could look at the team and things of that nature. But I think this is a big year. And I've said this year is kind of a big redemption year, it feels like, for Kirk. Just coming back from the injury, but also, you know, if he has success in the playoffs, you know, you can get those playoff questions out of the way. Raheem getting a second chance. Terry, you know, getting a second chance with a new coach to, you know, show that, you know, he can help lead and direct his team from the GM perspective. So I feel like there's a lot that can be gained from this year. I feel like for the
I mean, you can call it a redemption year, you can call it whatever you want, but it goes back to what I said. They've left themselves no excuses. They honestly have left themselves no excuses not to at least win the division and be competitive. If you're going to draft like that, if you're going to go out and pay your quarterback $100 million guaranteed and $180 million overall, you're leaving yourself no excuses. And they shouldn't have any. They've built a good roster the past 3 years. They went out and got a quarterback who supposedly is the missing link. All right. Now go win ball games. Now come out with a plus 500 record. And you'll get that equity that you have not been able to establish over the past couple of years. But Bryce, I got about one more minute or so before I got to boogie. Okay. Yeah,
I got you, man. That was my last question. I was about to wrap it up, man. So listen, Steve, I appreciate you coming on. Appreciate you talking Falcons with me, man. It's interesting to see what happens going into the offseason and what happens with this team as they get closer to their training camp in the season. But like I said, I appreciate you. Before you go, real quick, let people know where they can find you real quick.
Well, you can find me on X/Twitter and Instagram at Wyche, W-Y-C-H-E, number 89 at Wyche89. NFL Network will be sporadic over the summer. We don't have a ton of programming, but I am on NFL Network, and you can find me right here on this bomb podcast.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you, Steve. Appreciate you, Steve. And listen, guys, we're going to have to see what happens. Obviously, they're getting into mini camps soon, rookie mini camps, and we'll see how this team continues to progress as the offseason moves on. That's Steve. I'm Bryce. See you next time.